Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Foster from a company called Massive. I'll talk about more what Massive does in a little bit. Thank you all for listening in on this. If you are joining live on LinkedIn or if you're watching this later, today's presentation or discussion is really kind of a monologue, honestly, to talk about some ideas as a kickoff to a series that I'll be doing on LinkedIn over the next few months. And that series is called the Ethos series. So I'll talk about what I mean by ethos here in a moment as well. So please do, whether you're listening live or watching this later, please post your comments. And I'll mention this again at the end, but if you would like to be added to the calendar invite for the future parts of the Ethos series, just send me a direct message with your email address and I'll add you to the calendar invite. They'll be every other Friday at 11 a.m. Central. So, so let's go ahead and get started. So, just a little bit of background for context, in case you don't know who I am and are maybe was curious about even the topic about how I arrived at kind of where I'm at with this. Is I've been doing brand strategy for 21 years now, and it originally started off as probably the first 15 years as just a way to make a living. I was good at it. I I had sort of this innate ability to help people and brands express kind of the language of their soul. But about 5 years ago, what began to happen is I reemerged from my childhood this deep sense of justice, or maybe another way to say that is an awareness of injustice. And um, when I looked at I was asked this actually this morning by someone, how did I start talking about things like conscious branding? And it's interesting because it was kind of like three moments, two very, very tragic and negative, and one amazing moment. And they all happened in 2020. The first was George Floyd's murder. And we all know what happened. And as a what I call swam, a straight white American male, I, it was sort of the beginning of my much deeper sense of social consciousness. And then the second tragic event happened actually at the bookend of that in early 2021 was the January 6th insurrection, and this direct, blatant disrespect for the institutions of democracy. And the third one was meeting my partner in all the ways, Virginia, and her background as an activist, a feminist, an immigrant, a Latina. And it's not so much that she changed my views on things necessarily from like an ideological standpoint, but it was this tremendous insight into power dynamics and what it's like to feel disempowered. So I've been using all of these tools for all these years of branding and marketing, and always have been a heretic about it. Always pushed against the norms, and I don't like the 10x bros. I don't like click funnels. I think, as my friend Andy Cernovitz says, advertising is the price you pay for being boring. And those are all true and good and everything, but I couldn't keep my need to stand for justice separate from my work. So over the past few years, I've evolved how I do brand strategy and how I do messaging and all the things that I do. And out of it emerged this idea called ethos. So marketing as we know it started in the machine age, or you could say the industrial age. 300 or 400 years ago, when mass production started, marketing really became a thing. And then that exploded really during the mass communication era after World War II. But most people don't know that most of the teachings or most of the methodologies and philosophies of marketing came from Freud's nephew, a man named Edward Bernays, who is considered the godfather of PR. He's really the godfather of blatant manipulation. And so his teachings, he took his uncle's teachings or his uncle's ideas and applied them to mass communication and propaganda. And his ideas were used by Joseph Goebbels in Nazi Germany. They were used by Mao Zedong in communist China. And then later they were used in Madison Avenue, on Madison Avenue, as advertising models. And that has gone on for many, many years. Of course, the methodologies have or the tools have changed over that period of time, but it's essentially the same doctrine, if you will. And one of the fundamental things of this doctrine is that it is okay to manipulate people to buy shit they don't need, that it's okay, like it's morally ambiguous. And so, but something is happening in the business world. And again, I first noticed this around the same time, about 5 years ago, that I started to kind of wake up. And my friend Amber said it best, and this was like about 5, 6 years ago. She said, "Everywhere I go, I meet leaders with a secret spiritual life." And what we're seeing is that spirituality in business is becoming less and less of a secret and more of a secret weapon, if you will, for innovation, creativity, social impact, and so much more. In the last few years in particular, we've seen a marked increase in business leaders with consciousness practices. Um, it's not the most verifiable statistic because it's kind of cobbled together, but from what I found, roughly 12% of CEOs and founders have some sort of regular meditation practice. Um, and what they've done in their increasing of their consciousness, it could come from multiple ways. Some of it could come from meditation. Some of it could come from integrating trauma, having some sort of spiritual experience, a near-death experience, recovering from addiction, deconstructing the hologram they made to function in the world, plant medicine. However, they're getting there. They're getting there. And here's what happens when a person with power or influence, and like an owner, a business owner, CEO, founder, has an awakening and their consciousness is increased, they don't get to go live in a cave. They don't get to go be a pirate or a monk. They have a business to run, and most of the time they have a family, and so they have employees and customers, and so this leaves business owners and founders in a bit of a conundrum, because when your consciousness level is raised, you see people differently, you treat people differently, and then therefore in the business world, you have to market to people differently. And so this leads to one of the conundrums, as I said, that these business leaders have is, to put it simply, the language of consciousness is incompatible most often with the language of marketing. One is about inspiration and invitation. The other is about manipulation and persuasion. And so one is about speaking from the soul to the soul. And the other, like I said, is about really appealing to their ego in some way. So out of this, I was like, how would you solve this? How would you be a conscious person running a brand that you want to be a conscious brand? How would you do that? And that's where I came up with this concept I call ethos. So before we get into what ethos is specifically, I want to address a couple of things too, because I'm using terms that generally don't go together, like conscious and brand. That's, like I said, kind of incompatible possibly. And also even the word consciousness. Obviously, it's become more prevalent in the business world, but there's a lot of different definitions for it. And my definition of consciousness is an awareness of reality. That's how I define it. And however you get there, and I wrote an article about this last year, of the three kinds of consciousness: of intellectual or mental consciousness, which is sort of the neuroscience of consciousness, like Sam Harris talks about; spiritual consciousness, which is obviously more mystical; and then social consciousness. However you arrive there, you are arriving at an awareness of reality. In some ways, consciousness fits an axiological model too, is that it's intrinsic in the sense that it changes how you see yourself, it changes your relationship with your mind in particular. It's extrinsic, which is how you show up in the world, like your brand. And it's systemic, which is both how you behave, but how you see the various parts of systems working together. So that's a rough introduction to consciousness, and we don't need to belabor that more. So then what is a conscious brand? So I define a conscious brand with a Spanish word that I learned from Virginia. I define a conscious brand as a consequente individual or organization. What that means in my language is that their higher level of consciousness is consistently experienced by others to the point that it becomes their reputation. Is that their mind, their soul, their body, their intentions, their ideas, their behaviors are all integrated. And something, I would say, magical happens, but it's not really magic. It's more spiritual alchemy that happens when you do that, when you become consequente and you become consistent in how you live your life or how you run your business. Is that there becomes a magnetism, and in that magnetism, it pulls people in and repels some. I've long said that probably half of branding is repulsion, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But you can't be for everybody, and no repulsion, no differentiation. So there's magnetism, but there's also then the positive energetic footprint, that people just feel good around you or your brand. And then finally, there's this commitment to social impact. And I do believe this absolutely, that as you elevate your consciousness levels, it always comes with a social justice component. And the reason for that is something called spiral dynamics, which is essentially quantum theory applied to evolutionary psychology. And that is, you go from me, how you like, and this is similar to axiology, the intrinsic, myself. You go from me to we to everyone as your consciousness level raises. So that's what I believe a conscious brand is. So let's get into the conscious. Let's get into the core principles of conscious branding. And there's many, but I've chosen three to share today as part of this kickoff for the Ethos series. The first is dignity first. You know, there's a lot of talk now about being human centric and human driven and human, and that's great. I'm not against that. But seeing a human is not the same as treating them with dignity. And really, from a spiritual practice, this is what namaste means, that the light in me sees the light in you, or the divine in me sees the divine in you. So in conscious branding, everything you're doing is dignity first, is that you are eliminating anything that is a form of control or gaslighting or bullshitting people. You're eliminating all of that out of a sense of mutual dignity for who they are. The other thing about dignity first is that everyone has value, and everyone by their very existence is priceless. And so this idea of segmenting your markets into avatars or by demographics and everything is actually pretty dehumanizing. Now, I do believe in archetyping because it's more of a psychological profile, but even then, it's still dignity first. And so as an example of this in practice, BMW, their owner's manuals and a lot of their print ads, or if you go to the car dealership and get their brochures, the copy is written for each of the 9 Enneagram types to relate to. And once you kind of crack the code on that, it's kind of fascinating how you can see that's the one language, or that's 2 language. That's an example of dignity first, of seeing people where they're at. Allowing people internally inside of an organization to express themselves, to be who they are, to feel psychologically safe, is part of dignity first. And so what I'm teaching here with this idea is that not only are you seeing essentially souls before roles, you're first seeing that within yourself. One of the most prevalent issues with brands is an identity crisis, especially brands run by dudes. They don't really know who they are, especially if they're older. And so they use marketing to kind of have the market tell them who they are, which is not a good idea. And so this idea of loving yourself or seeing your own dignity and honoring your own dignity first also changes your behavior, because you put up with a lot less shit. You have more boundaries. You're willing to fire customers that don't match your values. You're willing to take a stand for what feels right for you instead of the monetized codependency that's so common in business. Um, so it starts with you. It starts with how your relationship is with your own soul. The second premise here behind conscious branding is that branding is actually, when done this way, is a spiritual practice. And again, that's a bit heretical, but let me explain what I mean. Think of the most enduring, famous brands in the world, the ones that have been around the longest, and they're people. They're not businesses. I think the oldest continuous business is a brewery in Germany that's about 600 years old. But most businesses are very young in this arc of time, but people brands are not. And so you could take, and often this comes through the lens of sort of theology or religious history, but there's a pattern here of branding being a spiritual practice, is that your famous brands are Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Abraham, David, Rumi, and then you could go further into Hinduism and other many other belief systems, and you'll find that these have these enduring brands. And why is that? Well, it goes back to what I said somewhat about axiology, is that there is, a sense of intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic, but I think it's actually more simple than that. And that is, when you connect to your soul, you will shine a light out into the world. And that light that you shine into the world is your brand. And when you do it consistently, and when you do it kindly, and when you do it where you are bringing original ideas and not regurgitation, you're not trying to start a cult or a corporation per se. You are just trying to start a movement of an idea. When you do that, that is the spiritual practice, because you have to go back to it every day. Because here's what will get in your way with your brand, with branding, is your ego. I experience this daily, multiple times per day, where there's things my ego wants to say about massive or opinions, and there's things my soul wants to say. And I would say most of the time, at least publicly, I express what my soul wants to say. But that's part of the spiritual practice that I'm referring to. The other couple of reasons why I think branding is a spiritual practice is that you always need to be re-examining who you are. We evolve as creatures. Faith and science kind of suffer from some of the same maladies, like certitude or rigidity. And it's so easy with branding and marketing to get locked into a certain philosophy. Like I said, the Bernays philosophy lasted for many decades. So this re-examination of your identity, re-examination of your values, re-examination of what you want to put out to the world, that is also a spiritual practice. And then the final one is that branding and entrepreneurism, but branding is an art in many ways. Marketing is more of a science, but branding is an art. And as an artist, you evolve, the market evolves, your skills evolve. And so there's this sort of iterative process of getting better and better at it. Well, pretty much any iterative process that results in growth is a spiritual practice. So when you start to think of branding as a spiritual practice, then you start to look at all of the things that are an antithesis to that. Often, conscious branding is to what you're going to stop doing. The last core principle here is seeing the market as a complex adaptive system. And I am not an expert in this. My amazing partner is. And so I strongly encourage you to go to our website or our Substack and look at her two-part series on why business leaders need to embrace complexity science. But I will explain it through this lens as of why we need to see it this way. Is, like I said, marketing was born, modern marketing was born in the machine age and exploded in the media age. And in addition to that, that machine thinking permeates businesses. And it is still very heavily influenced. It's still very Eurocentric. It's still very hierarchical, status oriented. It's still very patriarchal in many ways. Um, and that's because that was the power center for so long. And that's what you see a lot of upheaval in the world is those old power centers are shifting, primarily led by women from traditionally marginalized groups. Um, that's primarily who is leading this sort of evolution of out of these old power structures. Anyway, back to branding and marketing with this. If you bring a machine thinking mindset to the market, um, you are going to start to believe things like we sell emotions, we sell peace of mind, or you see this with that you can if you just carpet bomb the market enough, you get them to buy. You see that in political campaigns in particular. It's just the same message and hammering a message home, and they use a lot of low conscious masculine language like hammering, targeting, penetrating, things like that. That is because you have had power over a machine called your business, and you have been able to, through mass media, manipulate people. But it's harder to do that now. And if you're a conscious person, you don't even want to do that. So instead, looking at the market as a complex adaptive system allows you to harness the purest form of marketing there is, the same form of marketing that made Jesus, Buddha, Rumi, Muhammad, all of them famous. And that's word of mouth. Word of mouth is not an accident. It is the result of trust and delight and innovation. It is the result of something. It's applause. And you can create word of mouth. You can, end quote, go viral without seeing the market as a complex adaptive system, which is still a kind of a form of manipulation to try to go viral. Or you can organically go viral and it's word of mouth. And that is because all of these millions and billions of little strands of people noticing, sharing, talking is building this tapestry of what a brand is. So you could see brands that come out of nowhere with not a lot of marketing dollars, and they start to show up, and they do this in a very specific way. And one of them, my favorite ones, is Liquid Death, which is cans of water, and not really a category or anything like that, but they found a niche, and they have a social consciousness around the environment, and they have relied heavily on word of mouth. Another brand, I don't like this particular bourbon. I don't like the taste, but I like the way they branded themselves as Maker's Mark, competing against Jack Daniels, and how they did it through very specific word of mouth campaigns. That's honoring the fact that the market is a complex adaptive system, and you need them far more than they need you. And also I tell this to clients all the time when we're sitting down to talk about especially product marketing, is nobody gives a shit about what you're selling. They really don't. You have to introduce your ideas. You have to be findable. But to go in with any sort of arrogance is to deny that it is a complex adaptive system. So our job as marketers is to facilitate, if you will, word of mouth. And that loops all the way back to dignity first, because people will talk about how you made them feel far more than they will talk about what they bought from you. Because that's viral by its nature. That's part of the communal aspect of being a human. So the next thing I want to talk about here is how it's like, why does this matter? Okay, Justin, this is great theory. Why does this matter? And that's a good question, because it is related to how you do business. And there's a series of concepts here, and because I'm going to cover these more more in depth in the upcoming LinkedIn Lives on the Ethos series. I'm just going to touch on these for now. But think in terms of behavior change and outcomes and results. That's really what we're talking about. We're not even really talking about strategy or intention. Those are important, but this is about how becoming a conscious brand changes how you do business. One of the things it does is it adds a very important step. Most businesses follow this kind of structure of strategy, tactics, execution, results. And then they go back around. They're missing a big one, which was the driving force of all famous brands back to brands being a spiritual practice, and that is a core philosophy. And you look at brands like Apple and Patagonia and Southwest Airlines, Starbucks, Whole Foods, they have a core philosophy. And if you look at Whole Foods, yes, they're showing pictures of the food on their signs and when you go into the store, but around it, the language is the language of philosophy. It's a way of thinking that that you are either introducing people to, or you're inviting people to already think that way to the to the conversation. So that's the first thing that will change is you're going to lead with philosophy. And that is its own work that I'll talk about more in a minute. It's its own kind of methodology underneath all of that. But it's difficult to be a conscious brand by only going with strategy, tactics, execution, and results. If you don't add philosophy in front of it, people don't know what you believe. They don't know what your values are. And especially with millennials and Zoomers, is that they are far more interested in their values matching your values than they are with value, the price of something. The second one is language will become poetry, not persuasive. Marketing language kind of falls into kind of usually three buckets, unfortunately. And one is cheesy, cheesy one-liners and slogans and jingles and shit like that. The second is creepy. And creepy is this kind of messaging that is similar to sort of pickup artists or almost predatory language that they're using. And then the third one is boring language, what they often call white people language. So when you see language as poetry, then what you're seeing is, poetry is what people have used for thousands of years to break down a complex idea into a way that creates a type of enlightenment or understanding or connection. Well, that's the same thing as good brand language is the same thing. It's poetry. And it's using originality. It's getting rid of all cliches. It is becoming more heart-centric in the way that you communicate. And you go back and look, I encourage you to do this. Just go back and look at like a Red Wing boots ad or a Stetson hat ad from the early 1900s. The writing of their ads is incredible. And that's because it used to be a practice with these bigger brands, that they would hire fledgling authors to write copy for them because they were great writers. So Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck, Louis L'Amour, and many others kind of got their start writing ad copy. But because they're writers first and not marketers, it's very poetic in the way that they present it. The next thing that will change is as you become a conscious brand is you'll shift away from sort of like market share into conversation ownership. And conversation ownership is definitely an extension of category design, which is a big topic all unto itself. But it's essentially starting and owning a conversation. And when I say owning, I don't mean controlling. That's very important. Remember, the market is a complex adaptive system and you cannot control it. But it's facilitating conversations. The way I like to say it is your brand has the party, you're the party host, and you invite everybody over. It's that kind of mindset. And it could be uncomfortable conversations, talking about things that are taboo in business, or it could be owning a conversation about being more socially responsible, or a whole variety of things. The key to it is you will need to lead that conversation. And when you do that, it actually becomes your category. On a personal branding example, vulnerability is a concept, a conversation that is owned in large part by Brené Brown. And there are many other examples like that. A couple more here on what will change is you'll move into kind of iterative collaboration. You will become much more of a partner, a thought partner, an idea partner with your employees and your customers in the marketplace. And that collaboration isn't just getting people in a room to come up with something or to, give feedback on focus groups. Again, I'm not against focus groups, but it's not really iterative collaboration. Iterative collaboration is honoring that the collective of the marketplace, your client, especially your customers and your employees, they collectively have the solutions that you don't have. They have the improvements that you can't see. That's because they're living this. And then when you facilitate those opportunities for iterative collaboration, you step into almost like a Kaizen model of innovation, of continuous improvement. But it's not continuous improvement just through engineering per se. It's continuous improvement by listening to what people are telling you. And there are many famous, fun stories about Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. But he was asked once why they don't do research and development. They don't have a R&D budget, and he said that's because our team members, they make stuff that they would use, and if they like it, they know the marketplace is going to like it. And then they get feedback from and partner with their customers to continually improve designs or come up with ideas that didn't even exist before. And that's one of the greatest gifts of iterative collaboration, because it's not just that they will find solutions to problems. It's that they will come up with ideas that you would never have thought about at different angles, different perspectives. Partially, and this is why diversity is so important and why I'm such a big believer in DEI initiatives across the board, but especially in branding and marketing, is that collaboration, it changes based often on your relationship with power. Collaboration is very different when a bunch of rich white dudes get together than when there's a diverse group of people with various voices, backgrounds, paradigms. And I think within that collective intelligence is why there's so much innovation, why diversity produces innovation. So iterative collaboration is the practice of sort of harnessing that. Very related is the next point, is distribution of authority. A dear friend of mine, or ours, Alan Prussian, talks about power is meant to be given away. And he has this concept called reciprocating authority. And it's very much related to the machine thinking, top-down power dynamic of getting rid of that and distributing authority. And so distributing authority in a practical sense is often giving your team, your employees, a chance to fail, to risk, to try things. It's giving them the space to come up with ideas, and it's enabling them to fix problems for customers without getting approval first. It involves trusting people. And Jocko Willink, the famous Navy SEAL and co-author of Extreme Ownership, talks about how that when a team doesn't do what you want them to do, it's because that you did not trust them. It's not because of their level of competency necessarily. And so that's where trust is such an important thing here, and hiring and people, and even then distributing authority to your customers. Again, another Yvon Chouinard quote. He was asked, why don't they do financial forecasts? And he says, we let our customers tell us how much money we're going to make. That's distribution of authority, giving authority to your customers to decide how much money you're going to make. The last one here is of how a conscious brand changes a business is a social justice priority. And it no longer is good works. It's not corporate social good. It's not really about that. Again, I'm not against corporate social good and corporate social initiatives and all of that. It is viewing your brand as a social enterprise. And part of the work we do, both in a variety of ways, but especially with our moonshot experience, is helping you find out what your calling is so you can organize your life and your business and your brand around it in a way that humanity benefits and you can then monetize in an ethical way. And it goes back to what I said. Heightened levels of consciousness always come with a social justice component, always come with a need to change the system. Again, back to the spiritual masters that I mentioned. And no one was born to keep things the same. No, that's nobody's mission. So as as you see systemic issues, using your brand as a vehicle, a mechanism, as a lever for awareness, for resources, for um, outright tackling issues is it's a priority. It's a prerogative. It's not optional. It's just a matter of how you do it. And I remain, in many ways, a free marketer in a lot of ways. Not so much related to like income disparity, but just the way to see the marketplace. And I firmly believe that given more conscious businesses, conscious brands, conscious leaders, and that you take a list of the top 10 problems you see in the world or see in the United States, that a conscious business would be able to at least make a big dent in that, especially when they partner with nonprofits. So, the final part of today's presentation or sharing is back to what I said about ethos. And so ethos is a Greek word that is essentially kind of the spiritual dynamic of a person or a group of people. And an ethos has 5 components, and that's what each of the LinkedIn lives over the next every other week for the next, five times. I'm going to cover each of these in depth. And I touched on some of them, but you'll get the context now. The first element of ethos, which is the process of becoming a conscious brand, is to establish a school of philosophy that is sitting down in a facilitated way to learn, to relearn, to rediscover the iteration of your mission, your vision, your values, but adding to that your virtues, the virtues you believe in, adding to that the standards or boundaries that you have. And then it's back to that iterative collaboration, allowing the people, especially team members or employees, to be heard and contribute to that. So it's not just your top-down school of philosophy. And I call it a school of philosophy on purpose because that goes back to word of mouth. Stoicism is a school of philosophy, as an example. It's 2,000 plus years old, and it's still a school of philosophy that is, bringing awareness to people about these Stoic principles. The second one is a reiteration. In ethos, you're constantly creating brand poetry. You're not really writing marketing copy. This is why I'm not afraid of ChatGPT or any sort of AI related to marketing. There's things that need to be automated. There's technical writing that needs to be automated. There's a bunch of stuff that humans don't really need to write that generative learning would do a better, more consistent job. But the kind of poetry that I'm talking about requires someone to be connected to their soul and the soul of the brand. And it changes, again, how you communicate. Number 3 is leading a conversation, as I said, that becomes a category. And in that particular session, I'll be discussing what that kind of looks like more from an infrastructure standpoint, like a component standpoint. Because it's fine, and most people get that. Yeah, we should lead a conversation. We should be a category. But there's a set of practices and methodologies to get there and then to sustain it. The fourth area of ethos is what I call the art of unfinishing. And this is probably the most spiritual aspect of the ethos philosophy. And the art of unfinishing is the idea that the answers are in the unknown, and that the job of a leader is to lead into the unknown, not manage the known. And I give the art of unfinishing as a keynote, and my opening line to that is, "Men are obsessed with finishing," and that is true. And but business is iterative and unpredictable, and there's this fairly well-known a term now called VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. If indeed we're branding out in the world and we're growing our business, we're trying to reach people, we're trying to spread light, we're trying to do good, all those things, there's many elements we do not control. And allowing allowing and holding space to not become data worshipers, to not become systems or process apologists. That's the art of unfinishing. And then finally, I'll be touching on the last one on implementing ethical marketing practices. This is very practical. It'll be a very practical discussion about things that are ethical or unethical as it relates to consciousness. So these are not necessarily my opinions of ethics. They're the ethics of consciousness. There's a set of principles like namaste that's part of that. So this goes into sort of the day-to-day behaviors of how you do marketing. So those are the 5 elements of ethos. Because of iteration, they may evolve. I may change the terminology, but the concepts I feel very good about. So the final thing I want to leave you with is kind of where to begin. So I said this before, but you have to do the inner work. Branding is not a way to solve an identity crisis or an existential crisis. You have to do the inner work. Part of the reason is from David Hawkins' map of consciousness, which puts shame at the bottom and enlightenment at the top. You know what's in the middle? Courage. When you look around out into the business world, you don't see a lot of courage. The people that have done the work, the inner work of consciousness, of integrating their trauma, of expanding their mind, of controlling their ego, of reaching spiritual insight, you cannot help but get to the courage line. So I would ask you this: if you're not yet ready to go out and be who you really are and make the world react to you, you're not quite ready to be a conscious brand. You're on your way maybe, and that's okay. There's no hacks for this. There's no shortcuts. It's a process. But once you reach the courage line, that's when things start to change. That's when you start to think of building that school of philosophy in a collaborative way. This is where you start to get rid of all the manipulative language and manipulative marketing practices. This is where you begin to listen more than speak. All of that is above the courage line. And if you look at David Hawkins' map of consciousness, you can really see the ethos principles, the ethos conscious branding principles in that space between courage and enlightenment. It's pretty fascinating. So I hope you found this useful. I'll reiterate a couple of things. If you want to be, you'll see it on LinkedIn and you can, like it or join or register for it. But if you want to get the calendar invite, because sometimes we just get busy and we forget, that also guarantees you'll get the recording, even if you can't show up. Just direct message me on LinkedIn or whatever way you want to find me. I'm pretty findable, and I will add you to the invite. I'm very open to feedback. Thank you for those of you that attended live, and also for those of you that are watching this later. Feedback, challenge, criticism. I want it all. I want to hear about this because this is a radical idea when it comes to branding. And final ask is, if you know business owners or business leaders that you believe have a heightened level of consciousness, please introduce us to them. The work we do at Massive is this very interesting blend of, conscious branding, executive coaching and mindset coaching, and trainings and workshops on systemic leadership. And all of it is designed so that a business can go out and create systemic change in the world. That's what all of those components are. So if you know people that are at a heightened level of consciousness and want to do business differently, or want to brand differently, or want to think differently, or more consistently, please introduce us to them. So with that pitching at the very end of this, I will let you go. Thank you again for participating and listening, and we'll talk to you down the road. Have a good rest of your day.